So when we ask the question, what is Confucianism? What we have to understand is that the word Confucianism itself was invented by the second governor of Hong Kong in 1836 when he writes a book called Confucianism. If we translate Confucianism into Chinese, it's something like Kongzi like Makasa Juyi, Hagar Juyi, that it becomes a kind of doctrine. It becomes maybe a dogma. But Confucianism is Ru Xue. If we speak this tradition on its own terms, use its own language, Ru Xue is not Kongzi Juyi. Ru Xue is a social class. The Ru people are the people who did the bronzes. It goes back to the Shang Dynasty, that in the Shang Dynasty, a group of people came forward and began this process of aestheticizing the human experience, lifting the human experience out of our animality and making it into something that is elegant, something that is refined, something that is enchanted. And so the bronzes are really, we could use the bronzes as a way of telling the story of the Chinese tradition. That it begins in the Shang Dynasty 30 generations before Confucius, and it comes down generation after generation down to our contemporary time. The first time that we see this term, Ru, speaking Chinese, the first time that we see Confucianism, what we translate as Confucianism, is in the Analects, where you want to be an exemplary Ru, not a Shaoren Ru, not a small person Ru. It's a tradition that has this huge investment in the past. Confucius says of himself, 修而不作, I'm somebody who transmits the culture, I'm not somebody who's inventing it. And so it's very conservative as a tradition, but at the same time, it's a critical tradition. 如之何, 如之何. That when we ask the question, when we aspire to be moral, that in every situation we have to ask the question, what to do, 应该怎么做? If we follow the Confucian idea of 修, that morality in this Confucian tradition is not following some rules that we have received from something outside. Morality in this tradition is comporting yourself in such a way that you're growing your relationships in family, in community. And it's also a progressive tradition. 温故而知新, that what we do is you rehearse the past in order to move into the future. And so when we think about this concept of Ru, it is the intergenerational transmission and embodiment of a compounding cultural legacy that is very much focused on the idea of family. That the governing metaphor of this Confucian tradition is jia. What I want to do is I want to focus on two ways in which this concept of family is defining of the Confucian tradition. First, for the population as a whole, you have the notion of xiao. In English, we translate it as filial piety. But filial piety is this idea of intergenerational transmission. On the oracle bones, the character xiao is the combination of the older generation and the younger generation. And so on the oracle bones, the character for lao, for old person, the character kind of reminds you of that famous picture of Einstein, where he's got the crazy hair, and he's leaning on a walking cane. But when we have the character for xiao, no longer is it a walking cane, it's the next generation. And so xiao is the way in which we move from generation to generation. The older generation receives reverence from the younger generation. The younger generation receives delight because they are who they are because of the older generation.